Hello and welcome to the Grandfather's Cave. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about campaigns and how you structure and plan campaigns. In particular, I want to talk to you about what I call the Emergent Campaign. It's a way to plan and structure a campaign in a way that does not impose a lot of workload for you as a game master. Now let's roll initiative and let's get started. To start off, we have to define what constitutes a campaign. To my mind, a campaign is a series of gaming sessions that have some sort of continuity. The degree of continuity, however, is up to you and to your players. In one extreme, you can have something like an adventure path. Paizo Publishing has published a lot of really good adventure paths for the Pathfinder games. These are extremely well written and will take characters typically from level 1 to level 17. And while buying these booklets and running some pre-made adventures might seem like an easy job, I advise that you do not underestimate how much time you need to prepare for these. Usually these adventures are very well written, but there can be a lot of details that you as a GM should be aware of before running such adventures. These can be the lines of the plot, it can be locations, it can be characters, it can be monsters, and all these things might represent an actual workload for you as a GM. Going into an adventure path without having prepared sufficiently might result in an unsatisfying experience for you as a GM especially, but also for your players. However, a well-written adventure path is really enjoyable and something that you should try out at some point if you have not done so already. Another example of adventure paths are games such as Baldur's Gate 3, where you have a very structured story that even while there's a lot of room for player agency, it takes you basically from A to B, from start to end. As you might imagine, the problem with these adventure paths is the lack of freedom, both for your players and for you as a GM. As a GM, you can of course insert small side quests, but in my experience, it's generally not a good idea to deviate too much from the paths laid out in such publications. While adventure paths, they often have a very specific setting in mind, you can adapt these with some work. Thus, adventure paths can often be fit into a variety of locations. You can make changes to the non-player characters, and you can even make changes to some of the monsters in the adventure path. However, all these changes impose even more workload on the GM. On the other extreme, you might have your players run through a lot of unconnected adventures. An extreme example of this are living campaigns such as that of the Pathfinder Society, where a single player might have dozens of characters that they run through different adventures with different players and different game masters. In those instances, the only continuity is the one the players create for themselves. But even in a living campaign like the Pathfinder Society, you might have a lot of continuity. You might have a group of players or even a group of GMs running adventures for each other. And thus the characters participating in those adventures might have some connection and some continuity among themselves. Between the adventure path and the living campaign, you have what I think most GMs are actually running. That is a campaign where the GM has thought through some events or some thematics and created either a skeleton or a matrix, allowing both the players and themselves as a GM to make variations and changes and new choices as the story develops. And how much preparation a GM puts into such a campaign might vary. Some GMs like to prepare only the essential, while other GMs prepare an intricate matrix or a flowchart that describes the different stages of the campaign. Now I would like to explain what I call the Emergent Campaign. The Emergent Campaign is a campaign that really does not start as a campaign. It simply requires for you as a GM and your players to sit down at the table and start playing. You could be playing pre-made modules, or you can be playing adventures that you as a GM have prepared. They don't have to be connected in any way. However, you will likely notice that your players are starting to form a narrative of their own. Sometimes they will see connections that you have not seen, and those could be the foundation of a new campaign. At this point, it could be your job as a GM to start leaning in to this narrative that the players have identified. On the other hand, you might experience that players do not see any connections at all and just enjoy playing a couple of detached adventures. However, after running a few adventures, you might revisit those adventures and see for yourself if there are any commonalities or common themes that might unite these. When you do this, it is easy to get inspiration for new ideas that all speak into the same theme. At this point, however, it is also important that you as a GM start to listen to what your players are saying. What is their goal? What do they want to accomplish with regard to this narrative? Let me give you an example. The current campaign that I'm running started a bit like a West Marches campaign or like a Pathfinder Society campaign. I had the players create a couple of characters and threw some seemingly random adventures at them. We started with the people of the pit from Goodman Games and then played a couple of the adventures from Castle Caldwell and beyond, specifically the clearing of Castle Caldwell, the Dungeons of Terror, and the rescue of Princess Sylvia, which I have described in previous videos. The latest adventure that I'm running for this group is the Palace of the Silver Princess, and this is where our Emergent Campaign begins. These adventures all seem quite unrelated and do not have a lot of thematic commonality. In the People of the Pit, the adventurers go into a large chasm, trying to save some peasants that have been abducted by cultists and are confronted by hideous monstrosities with a lot of tentacles. Afterward, going into Castle Caldwell, they just find some bandits, some goblins, and some random merchants there. And continuing from this point, they enter the Dungeons of Terror. Underneath Castle Caldwell, there is a dungeon complex that needs to be cleared. And the way I made it, the inhabitants beneath Castle Caldwell were degenerate mutants that worshipped a vile god of slaughter and insanity. In the fourth adventure, the rescue of Princess Sylvia, I actually let the player characters rescue the daughter of the merchant that had purchased Castle Caldwell from a band of goblins and hobgoblins. There as well, I had made some changes to the adventure in order to tie it a bit together with the previous adventures. This leads us to the present. Right now, the players in my campaign are exploring the Palace of the Silver Princess. They have run into some goblins, and I found that the place has been permeated by some foul magic. At this point, I could run this module just as described in the original material. However, I'm starting to do some changes here. I'm starting to change monsters so that more and more of them are goblinoids, like goblins, hobgoblins, bugbears. And in addition, I'm throwing in a lot of seedy human characters that match the profile of cultists. For instance, the captain of the guard was murdered by a soldier called Travis that has gone insane. And here I see an opportunity to link it to that old god of insanity and slaughter. Thus I can make Travis either a member or a victim of this insane cult. And exchanging the orcs that Travis is working with cultists makes a lot of sense. In addition, there is a cleric called Carathanimous that is making some foul ritual to bring an evil immortal back into the world. In my version, Carathanimous is going to be another non-player character that the player characters have met earlier, and that is connected to the evil tentacle cult. Instead of bringing some random immortal into the world, the cultist is trying to awaken a powerful servitor of this god of insanity. And thus I'm establishing a connection between the tentacle cultists and that god of insanity and slaughter. All of a sudden, I have a plot that involves some crazy cultists and a lot of goblinoids that are working for them. In addition, the player characters have had a couple of run-in with doppelgangers in a couple of these adventures. And I think that it would make a lot of sense in a future city adventure to have it involving doppelgangers in the service of this same cult. Some of the stronger monsters that are found in the Palace of the Silver Princess, like harpies or werewolves, I will exchange for some of the hideous tentacle monsters that the tentacle cult were creating. Those that in the original Goodman Games adventure were called the Tone. In this way, out of 5 basically unconnected adventures, I'm starting to create a campaign. A campaign that involves a conspiracy with an evil, insane cult and a lot of goblinoids. Whether players want to take this adventure, however, is up to them. But for me as a GM, it is useful now to have this theme. Thus, I can keep introducing goblinoids and cultists, and in this way pique the player character's attention, or maybe even frustrate them into a point where they think that they have to do something in order to stop whatever is going on. And really, nothing is going on yet. But I'm sure that the players will make up something that is actually going on. I hope that you found my introduction to the Emergent Campaign interesting. While preparation is also required in this sort of campaign, I feel that the workload required here is much smaller than in other campaigns. This does not mean that I don't run adventure paths or standalone adventures, or that I don't create campaigns from scratch. But in this way, I want to show you how you can make a campaign out of what started out as a bunch of unrelated standalone adventures. If you like the contents of this video and found it useful, please press the like button and subscribe so that you don't miss any future videos. You can support this channel on Buy Me a Coffee. And until next time, keep slaying.